My friend was being ignored and left out by her main friend group. I regret trying to get answers. My friend, Alice, and I are girls in their early 20s. Alice has a main friend group of 6 girls, including her. They're all in their early 20s and, according to Alice, usually went to the movies, streamed TV series, and discussed their everyday lives, among other things. I should have noticed something was up sooner, but I have a habit of looking on the too positive side. To better understand this situation, here's the context. Back in early November, Alice told me her friends were starting to hang out without her. She would try to initiate plans, but they'd always fall through, because her friends would always say they overestimated the time they had to hang out. While this sounded concerning, I wasn't willing to believe friends of 5 years would ditch her without reason. When I discussed it with her, I told her it was likely a coincidence. She then told me her friends were still responding to TikTok and Instagram posts along with direct messages. It seemed to me she was overthinking. When I told her that, she let out a sigh of relief. Everything seemed to be fine. Alice had a group chat with her friends. On January 14th, she told me the group chat had been silent for an entire day, which, according to her, was unusual. The last of her messages any of her friends responded to was sent on the morning of the previous day, January 13th. All private messages about the chat were ignored. I didn't know what to tell her. She then told me she tried initiating plans with Sarah, but it turned out she was busy. She went to Sarah's Instagram page where there was a new IG story. She tapped the story, and what popped up was an image of all 5 of her friends sitting next to each other, holding glasses of wine and laughing. Alice buried her hands in her face and moaned. I empathized with her as I knew how harrowing social anxiety can be. That pit is a terrible, overbearing feeling. All I could do was tell her to wait. It didn't help that nobody would respond to private messages about the group chat. It really didn't help when, as the weeks went by, the chat remained empty. In early February, I was at a bar when I ran into Jessica, one of Alice's friends. I asked her about the group chat. Why was it empty? Why had it been empty for weeks? We don't have anything to say in there anymore. That's when I noticed Snapchat was open on her phone. There was an active group chat called Main Friend GC. I pointed at it, then asked her if Alice was part of it. No, it would be annoying for her. She turned her attention to her phone, leaving me confused, but with something to tell Alice. Once I told her, she told me her friends could have at least told her about the new chat. I agreed. I was distraught seeing all of this happening to a good friend of mine, so this is what I told her. I'll go tell them they need to include you more if they're really your friends. This is the thing I regret saying, not because of what it means, but because of the circumstance it would end up putting me in. Over the following few months, I'd hear Alice crying. Whenever I asked her what was up, it was always that she saw social media photos and videos of her friends hanging out without even speaking about or tagging her. Eventually, this interaction happened. Alice opened the comment section under Sarah's latest post. She scrolled down and hit the bottom. Her eyes widened. Where's my comment? Did she delete it? I wanted to assure her it was probably a glitch. But at that point, it was obvious her friends were leaving her out and refusing to comment on their absence. Alice went to Jessica's account, then navigated to the comment section of her most recent post. She scrolled through a couple dozen comments, then gasped. I left like 3 comments on this post. She then checked the comment section under Leah's latest post. Same thing. Anna's latest post. Same thing. After checking Sandra's latest post, she told me it was the same thing. Her friends deleted all her comments. She moaned. I can't take this anymore. I was frustrated for her. As far as I've been told, her friends' accounts are all private and they don't accept random follow requests. I got Alice to try to set up a sleepover with them. She messaged each of her friends, then we waited. To my actual surprise, Alice told me they responded with plans for a sleepover at Sarah's house the following Saturday at 9 p.m. At 8 p.m. on Saturday night, Alice told me she got a message from Sarah reading, Sorry, Alice, we're going to have to cancel the sleepover. I'm really busy right now. How about we shoot for some other time? I cringed at the excuse and that suggestion, knowing how fake they were. It hit like bricks, and I wasn't even experiencing this firsthand. Alice and I left the house. All we brought with us were our wallets and keys. We weren't going to commit to anything nobody wanted to commit to, but this was ending tonight. At around 8:30, we reached Sarah's door. I knocked, then took a deep breath. Sarah answered the door, eyes widening as they rested on Alice. Hold on a second. Sarah turned away, but I wasn't going to wait another second for this to end. No, we need to speak to you right now. Don't ignore us. I know that's what you like to do now, but you just can't. Sarah turned to face me. You two aren't supposed to be here, especially not you, Alice. Alice furrowed her brows. Why are you doing this to me? I don't want to cry anymore. Just tell me why you aren't answering my messages and why there's a new group chat I wasn't told about. Do you guys want to be my friends anymore? Just tell me. Sarah furrowed her brows. You know what, Alice? My friends and I aren't obligated to hang out with you, so just leave us alone. That was the kind of lame excuse I expected. I pointed at her. Maybe you need to be upfront with her. Don't lead her friendship on. Nobody needs to be emotionally tormented. Maybe she deserves people who actually care about her. And don't leave her out. What did she ever do to you anyway? Sarah stared into my eyes. You're not welcome here. I don't know why Alice brought you here, but it's not going to change anything. Determined to get some actual answers, I stepped towards her. But Alice told me we should go. I looked at her. We need answers! No, we should just go. You're right. I shouldn't be around toxic people. This is too much for me. Alice turned to the street, then walked along the pathway. I couldn't argue with what she said, so I followed behind. We walked along the sidewalk in silence. I had a hard time processing how stupid this situation was. On our way, I heard the murmuring of a couple familiar voices. I looked back and saw 5 people walking a few dozen feet behind me. I took it as a coincidence. This group was just minding their own business, right? Then I heard the name, Leah, being uttered in Sarah's voice. I leaned close to Alice's ear. I think your friends are following us. I looked back again. The girls were now speed walking. They sped under the shine of a streetlight, revealing a terrifying sight. They wore masks crafted out of gray toques and were each carrying 2 hammers, all pointing right at us. My heart sunk deep into my chest. Then I turned my focus back onto the sidewalk in front of me and ran. Alice sprinted alongside me with a look of absolute terror. We took a left onto another road, then avoided every streetlight so we could avoid being seen. I was tempted to look back, but wasn't willing to. We took another left, then a right. At some point, I looked behind me. Nobody was there, aside from Alice. There was a streetlight shining on the corner we had just taken. I thought we had lost them, and took deep, exhausted breaths. Dread filled my guts when I saw a couple of the girls walk under the light. My adrenaline shot up, compelling me to continue sprinting. Alice and I took more lefts and rights, with me hoping to my soul I wouldn't find out what those psychopaths wanted. The worst part of it is, I thought they were regular everyday people. Now, they're ganging up and chasing after us with hammers for whatever reason. Soon enough, I was out of breath again. Despite the adrenaline coursing through me, I slowed to a stop. I looked back. No girls. Alice had stopped as well and was pretty much on her knees. I was trembling, hoping we had lost them. Eventually, we continued running. By the time we got back to my home, my legs were about to break. Before we returned, I had called the police and made an agreement with Alice to hide at my place due to the fact her friends didn't know where I lived. We sped inside. I locked both of the doors, then shut every curtain while Alice shut off every light. Right now, I'm exhausted and shaky, to the point where all I can do is breathe. I barely want to move, but I may jump anytime I hear a knock or even anything similar to one. I'm not, under any circumstances, telling you the room Alice and I are hiding in. I hope this ends soon. The police are on their way, so we should be good, right? Unless the girls get here before the cops do, then do things to us. We didn't get any answers, and I honestly don't feel like we will, but maybe that'll change someday. That's all I wanted. Right now, though, we're in need of help. I was shaking, stressing over the idea the girls might break in at any second. Eventually, the police arrived and told us they'd be on the lookout, which eased most of my nerves. Alice and I still needed to hide, though, and for how long was unknown. A couple of hours after the police left, there was a knock on the front door. A male voice echoed in. Hello? We have the property secured. May I come in? I went over to the door and answered it. Relieved help had returned. The officer stood on my welcome mat with his radio in hand. I took a deep breath. Thank you so much for coming. Can you stay for a while? Yes, I will stick around. Because your description of the perpetrators is quite alarming, I've brought backup. I sped to Alice's room, then repeated to her what the officer told me. She sighed in relief, but still had that look of conflict and stress on her face. No matter how much we had discussed her friends, I was still confused as to why they hated her. She has never done anything wrong, as far as I know. This situation was so out of the ordinary. She was always pretty innocent and sweet, so who would act out against her as if she had done something criminal? The officer was at the kitchen table, speaking into his radio, while Alice and I went over the things she has done that her friends may have mistaken for malice. We couldn't come up with a single thing that would drive anybody to chase after anybody with hammers. Who would be that pressed about someone being unable to hear them? Reading a text wrong? Looking in the wrong place at the wrong time? Eventually, the officer walked over and told us to follow him outside. We put our shoes on, then out we went. The 3 of us were mostly silent as we walked along the sidewalk. It was a chill, warm night, so quiet I could only hear the sounds of our footsteps. At some point, we stepped into a convenience store. The cashier was absent and there were a few candy wrappers littered across the floor. The officer brought us into one of the aisles, then looked us both in the eyes. You hear the music playing? That'll be your lesson for tonight. It was a rap song about trust. I didn't understand what it had to do with the situation. I didn't understand how what the officer said was supposed to fit in with the atmosphere of this situation. Before I could open my mouth, I heard the front doors. The officer looked over, then stepped away from us. 5 girls walked in, all with toque masks and hammers. My heart dropped. The girls stood by each other, left hands resting on their hips as they all stared at Alice and I. Alice gasped, "Oh my God!" The officer let out a good laugh right at our faces. I raised my right brow at him. "Why are you laughing right now?" The girl started giggling, but not in any innocent way. The officer shook his head at us. "You two seriously thought you were safe with me?" I was confused. Why would a police officer say that? What did he mean? What was he doing? The girl to the far left pointed her hammer at the officer, giggling. "He's my boyfriend!" The officer took his hat off and let it fall to the ground. "I need to get out of these clothes. See you later, Sandra." It was like my soul turned to ice. All those feelings of assurance and safety were just the result of a trick. How'd they even do this? What happened to the police we called? Our safety wasn't real. I looked at Alice, whose pupils had shrunk and looked less colorful, like the life was taken from her. "Why? What are you doing?" Sandra rolled her eyes. "We got you to come here so we can get you. Did you have fun feeling safe?" Sandra's boyfriend walked up to the doors. The girls moved out of his way to let him exit. My brows furrowed. I stared at Sarah. "Whose idea was this? This is cruel and... You shouldn't be doing this stuff." Sarah, shifting her weight onto her right leg, pointed her hammer at her head. "Mine, actually." The girls sprinted towards Alice and I, eyebrows furrowed and hammers pointed at us. I grabbed Alice's shoulder, then turned and sprinted to the back of the store with her. There was a door, but the handle wouldn't budge. My nerves were stinging. Next thing I knew, excruciating pains hit my back and shoulders. The force of a hammer brought me to the floor. Then I was kicked in the knee. The pain was unbearable. I let out a scream. Leah grabbed both my hands and held them above my head. Then Sarah and Sandra stomped on both of my kneecaps, making me scream. They then started scraping my waist with the front of their hammers. Meanwhile, Alice was wailing and screeching. Jessica and Anna weren't holding back, striking every nerve-ending heavy part of her body once, before scraping her forehead. I could barely do anything other than kick and wail. The only thought on my mind was, why? I was then struck in the head, and everything went blurry. Sometime later, I awoke in an empty room with white brick walls and a metal door with no window. My body was aching from the hits it took, and I was confused as to where I was. Hours went by and nothing happened. All I had were my thoughts. Eventually, I fell asleep and woke up to a plate with 3 slices of steak sitting beside me. It was cold, but I was hungry and had nothing else to do. I'm unsure how much time passed, but I was given some more cold steak meals, and my legs were aching less. While the hits from the hammers were painful, I should admit they weren't very strong. I can only guess it was more of an intimidation thing than it was torture. It was still quite painful, though. Another hour had to have gone by before the door creaked open. It was Sarah, without her mask, face, and long blonde hair fully visible. She was holding a jar in her hands while staring into my eyes. "I brought this. Have fun with it." She pointed the jar at me, then twisted the lid off. Shutting her eyes, she turned the jar upside down, letting a blurry object fall to the floor. It looked odd. It was as if something was able to be given a sensor blur in real life. As I stared at it, my heart dropped. Shivers ran down my spine and my head began to ache. Sarah backed out of the room, shutting the door on her way out. What made this worse was the click of the door being locked. I jumped up, looking at the blurred object as it sat on the concrete floor. I needed out. I picked myself up, ignoring the aching, and stumbled to, then body slammed the door. I twisted the handle, hoping I could somehow rip it out. Of course, it was no use. Fear really does things to your confidence, doesn't it? I was hyperventilating, but then I wondered, why was I so afraid of this? It was an object. It can't move. I sat down facing the door. I was not going to look at that rancid thing. I hated it so much. It was like its purpose was to heighten my fight or flight response. Specifically, the flight part. I reached into my pocket for my phone. As I pulled it out, I noticed the screen was terribly scratched and cracked. LOL had been written on it with mascara. All I could do was throw it at the object, but I would need to look at the object in order to properly aim for it. I buried my head in my arms, hoping I'd at least fall asleep. Well, I did fall asleep, but I woke up to a painful prickling on my left shoulder, like hundreds of needles were poking me at a time. I looked and saw, up close, the blurry object. It was just sitting on my shoulder until it moved. Shocked to my soul, I jumped up and ran my shoulder into the wall. The thing fell off and landed by my foot. I went over to grab my phone, then blindly threw it at the thing while turning my head away. The phone made a thump rather than a crash, so I had to have hit the thing. While catching my breath, the painful prickling returned near the center of my back. My stomach tightening, I took my shirt off, then slammed it to the ground. Luckily, it was covering the object, but I could see a hump moving around. I became disoriented, throwing up on the ground. I had felt enough fear for enough time to grow frustrated. In a desperate need to get rid of the thing, I took my right foot and stomped the hump again and again and again. I heard a splatter. Once I could feel I had flattened the thing, I stopped. I bent down and gently lifted my shirt until I started seeing a disgusting mush of black, red, and purple along with a white slime. As disgusting as it was, my adrenaline wasn't rising. However, my shirt had rips and disgusting stains. The door clicked, then creaked open. My heart skipped a beat. I stood up, hoping to my life it wasn't one of Alice's twisted friends. It was just Alice, her face flushed, eyes sunken. Her shirt was torn, exposing her stomach and shoulders. She let out a deep sigh. "What did they do to you?" I explained everything. She nodded. "They made me eat one." I nearly threw up again. "They made you what?" "Yeah, Sarah and Sandra tied me up. Then Sarah put a tube in my mouth and I can't even—" I was desperate to know why Alice's friends were doing this. Going to the greatest lengths possible to torment Alice and I. "Did they do anything else to you?" They sat away from me and talked about all the fun things they've done together, along with all the fun things they plan on doing with each other. I tried to talk to them, but they'd barely respond. Then, apparently, Sarah stole my childhood DVD and brought it with her. She stood up and scratched it against the wall while the others giggled and glanced at me. "Well, that's cruel. They're horrible, terrible people." It was worse that they weren't wearing their toque masks anymore. It was like a casual hangout I wasn't invited to. "Did they even passively talk about their problem with you?" "No, but they would occasionally bring up my name, then go, 'you' and 'gross,' or make a disgusted face." Alice did not deserve to go through any of this. I wanted to figure out what her fake friend's problem was. And even if Alice did something wrong, 1, she'd be the one to apologize and do better. I doubt she'd have done it on purpose. 2, her friends are definitely in the wrong for being violent, impersonating authority, and kidnapping. Why can't people just communicate? Or at least say they don't want to communicate? I told Alice we needed to stay far away from her psychotic excuses for friends. She nodded her head in agreement. "Definitely. Although I think one of them was neutral." Neutral means you don't care about the stuff the toxic one is doing. You don't want to cut them off for being toxic, because you don't see that what they're doing is wrong. Alice nodded her head in agreement as a woman with long black hair who looked to be in her 30s peered into the room. "Oh my God, are you two all right? I'm an employee here. I heard there were 5 girls causing some trouble." Alice looked at her. "Yeah, they made me eat a weird bug and socially humiliated me." The employee nodded her head. "I see, all right. You two need to come with me." We followed the employee into the hallway. I couldn't guess where we were. The hallway was just white bricks and gray metal doors along both walls. It didn't help that I couldn't recall how I got here. Every question Alice and I asked was ignored, which meant I had to wait longer for any answers. It couldn't be that long, though, right? At the end of the hallway, there was a pair of double doors. The employee held one of them open for us, and when we walked through, a pit formed in my stomach. The 5 psychopaths were standing by each other in the center of an empty lobby, pointing their phones at us. Sarah rested her left hand on her hip. "You, look, it's those sluts!" Sandra flipped back her long black hair. "They're so gross!" I looked into the employee's eyes, waiting for her to tell them off. I was hoping she'd curse them out too. She nodded her head left and right. These 2 girls were trespassing on this property and brushing up against male employees without consent. Say what you need to. And if my trust in authority hadn't already been obliterated, now we were being framed? The psychos put their phones away. I looked at Alice to check for her reaction. Her brows were furrowed. "I know everything about you, by the way. We've been friends for 8 years. Jessica chuckled. "Oh yeah? We know everything about you too. We still have that video of you being tricked into keying someone's car by being told it was a junk car you could practice your rage on." The girls chuckled. Alice had a look of determination. Meanwhile, I was shaking. What's about to happen? Did Alice have to say that at this moment? Sarah looked me in the eyes. "Alexa, you shouldn't be friends with Alice if you don't want to be dragged into her problems. You wouldn't be framed as a sex offender if you weren't here." I raised my right brow. "But you're the ones causing these problems. You're torturing Alice. And you aren't giving us any reason." The girls slid their phones into their pockets, then walked over to me. I was cornered. Even if there weren't 6 women cornering me, the exit doors were boarded up beyond their frames. There was no immediate way out. Sarah was staring me down. "You know what, Alexa?" I was sinking, still unable to process any of this very well. "What?" Sarah and Sandra sped up to me, then grabbed me by the arms. I froze, reminded of what went down in the convenience store. Jessica smirked. "I think we should let Alexa get her words out now." Sarah giggled. "I bet she thinks people will believe the bug thing." Sandra giggled. "That was the reason we introduced her to the bug, so..." The employee gave me her phone. Then she told me to vocalize every word I type. As I typed this, the girls giggled and rolled their eyes at every moment of fear I recounted. They want me to feel small, but I'm too distrusting of them already. I want this to be settled peacefully and maturely. I don't want to go through any more torture. Sarah and Sandra dragged me back into the hallway. I begged to be let go, but they continued as the other 3 walked behind. After about a minute of being dragged, the girls stopped at a door labeled 132. Jessica and the other 2 went in, then came back out, each holding 2 jars. Sarah and Sandra pushed me backwards onto the floor, then walked by the other 3 as they closed their eyes and smashed the jars onto the ground. They turned around and sprinted away, with Sarah and Sandra sprinting behind. Great! I closed my eyes and stood up. I wanted to run right after them, but a loud bang startled my eyes open, and I saw one of those bugs in the corner of my eye. I jumped, instinctively looking at the thing. I noticed there were 6 of them crawling all over the carpet, lightly tearing it up as they moved. My heart sank. A deep chill overtook me. I turned around and sprinted for my sanity. There was no way those things would catch up to me, but there was also no way I was going to be allowed out of this place. I turned a corner, then another. Once I made it to the end of the hallway, the lights went out. My adrenaline shot up. I felt around for an unlocked door, my nerves racking more, so each time a handle failed to budge. Eventually, I found a door I could push open. I sped into the room, then pushed the door shut. It wasn't long before a terrible stench hit me. Like nobody had cleaned the room in weeks. It was my only choice. I sat down, back up against the door, burying my head in my arms and legs. I was worried for myself, but I was especially worried about my friend. Where was she? What was happening to her? I could only guess something terrible was happening. This was the only time any girl had ever been cruel to me. It was odd to get such stereotypically feminine punishments. Well, the hammer thing was probably the only stereotypically masculine punishment, as anything done with the upper body is stereotypically masculine. Escapist processing aside, as I sat in the bathroom, I had no idea what to do. I sat in there for what felt like hours, having to endure the horrid smell. At some point, the light switched back on. I looked straight ahead, noticing a lineup of 4 bathroom stalls. They all had writing on them. Bored out of my mind, I went over to read some of it. Not my friends. I don't know why I have to be here. All I know is my friends aren't my friends. I don't think they ever were. They beat my friend into a coma. Why did they feel the need to do that? Just why? I don't want to see those bugs again. I don't want to see those bugs again. I don't want to see those bugs again. I hate this place so much. I'm not a slut for wearing stuff I wear for comfort and self-love. They hit me with baseball bats and scratched my childhood DVDs right in front of me. Do they do this to boys? If I ever get out of this building, who do I call about the bugs? I know where they're from, but it sounds too crazy. Standing closer to the stalls, I noticed some drawings here and there. They all had repeated themes and were clearly drawn by different people. Black dots, 5 flaming people, and circles within squares with one horizontal line through the center. There were also a ton of scratch marks. At some point, I used one of the toilets. As I flushed, I noticed a dried-up reddish-brown splatter on the floor to the left of the toilet. I gagged. I've seen stuff like that before. Whatever happened, there could not have been pretty. I did not want to go mad. I just wanted to get out of this rancid building and be far away from the girls. I got right out of the stall, washed my hands and face, then contemplated my next move. Running while staring up at the ceiling was risky, as the bugs could be sitting up there. Running with my eyes shut would be worse, considering how I am with implications. I had to do something, so I chose the second option. I reminded myself of the blood splatter, closed my eyes, then bolted out of the bathroom. I felt a long wall on my way through the hallway. I jumped and nearly froze at every bump. I put my weight on every step, ready to stomp any mentally deactivating bugs. Just after the first corner, the smell of gasoline hit my nose. I kept moving, but it wasn't long before I couldn't stand straight. My breaths were shallow. I was getting more and more disoriented. Eventually, I collapsed. I awoke in a small room. It was empty. Aside from one girl sitting to my left, it was Alice. Her face was bruised up, hands cut in a couple spots. Her eyes were pointed at me, watering up. A pit formed in my stomach. I wasn't going to let any of that happen to me. Alice! Tell me what happened! Alice groaned. My blood boiled. I stood up, then walked over to the door. With every bit of anger, I body slammed the door. Hopefully, the psychopaths would come over, so I could persuade them to talk. After about 10 minutes, I was on the ground, catching my breaths. The door handle clicked. Then Sarah stepped in. Are you tired? My adrenaline was too high for me. Give up. I picked myself up, then ran into her. I grabbed her arm, pulling her to the ground. I sat on her neck, then just let everything out. Why are you doing this to us? Tell me what your problem is, you freak. She was struggling. Get off of me! Not until you tell me why you're ignoring us. We can fix this if you just talk. Alice, she's a toxic fake friend. Is that why she's never been fake to me? Let alone torture me like you clearly just tortured her? I don't trust you. You're the one who's fake. If she's responding like that, we know what their problem is. I looked over at Alice. What is it? They have some biased negative idea about me, I guess. That made the most sense out of any possibility. They just came up with some negative ideas about her while she was minding her own business. I didn't want to know why they'd resort to everything they've done so far, so I got off of Sarah. I stood by her head as she stood up. I was at a loss about what might happen next. Was she going to retaliate? I noticed a bottle of pepper spray on in her back pocket, then saw Jessica turn a distant corner, carrying a hammer. I didn't care anymore. I grabbed Sarah by the neck, putting her in a chokehold, then bringing her back to the floor. I grabbed the pepper spray, then ducked into the room. I grabbed Alice by the arm and helped her up. As I exited the room, I sprayed Sarah in the face, leaving her covering her eyes in pain. Walking through the hallway, Jessica was speeding towards us. I sprayed her, then she dropped her hammer and covered her eyes. I grabbed her hammer, then went for the double doors at the end of the hallway. Alice was nearly tripping over herself. I glanced at her, but she shook her head and told me she was okay. Meters from the double doors, the lights went out. I slowed my pace, but felt for the doors, managing to bust through them and enter the lobby. I took a right, feeling around for the boards covering the exit doors. Once I felt the wood of the boards, I let Alice go, then struck the board again and again, until light started seeping into the room. I smashed the board up, creating a hole almost big enough for me to climb through. As I continued, the lights came back on. I heard some voices. One of them sounded like Sandra. I kept going at the board. Once the hole was big enough, I grabbed Alice, then pushed the door open. All I could see ahead of me was a patch of gravel and a forest. Alice and I sped away. I still had no idea where we were, and I wasn't recognizing this place from the outside either. We ducked into the nearby trees, continuing our getaway. Sometime later, we reached a gas station. There, I called the police. Once they arrived, I told them everything. Alice got the help she needed. Then we were brought back to my home. There was no word on what was happening to those psychopaths yet, and I was eager to find out. Alice and I sat on the couch, settling down after all that had happened. Alice's brows were furrowed. I told her to let it out. She turned to me. They told me to keep the videos from their old YouTube channel. I didn't know better yet back then, but I did know not to say the stuff they said. What did they say? Alice showed me 3 videos. In the first one, Sarah is joking around with the others. They all refer to people they dislike as, well, the N-word. In the second one, Jessica and Sandra are walking along a sidewalk on a sunny day. They both talk about how they tripped a blind person for fun the previous day. In the third one, the girls were using transphobic slurs to mock each other. Alice gave a look of disgust and told me she wasn't aware of what those words meant at the time and was glad she didn't end up using them herself. It was sickening, and it was on top of all the stuff they've done to Alice and I. Alice looked at me. I kind of want to share these around the internet. I watched her post the incriminating videos, then send them to every one of her ex-friends' friends. Her ex-friends commented on the videos, asking her why she'd do this. Alice responded with this: "Don't pretend you didn't ignore and humiliate me, you psycho. Now that I've posted these videos, you're done." She then blocked them. One managed to respond before getting blocked. "You were calling me fat." Alice had a look of disgust on her face. Why would I ever do that?" She deleted the comment, then blocked her. With no word on Alice's ex-friends, I contacted the police to ask them about it. During some back and forth, I was told to be patient. The girls are being investigated, and if any incriminating evidence is found, the right actions will be taken.